I was standing in my driveway at 6 in the morning, coffee in hand, when a woman in a crisp beige pantsuit materialized beside my mailbox with a clipboard that screamed trouble. "Excuse me, are you Jason Lawson?" she asked, her tone already dripping with authority I hadn't granted her. "That depends on who's asking," I replied, taking a sip of my coffee. Something about the way she held that clipboard told me I wasn't going to like whatever came next. "My name is Patricia Henderson, and I'm the newly elected president of the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association. I'm here to discuss your overdue maintenance fees for the road infrastructure." I nearly choked on my coffee. "I'm sorry, what? What HOA? What maintenance fees?" Patricia's painted-on smile didn't waver. "Mr. Lawson, Riverside Meadows was officially incorporated as an HOA community 6 months ago. As a property owner on Maple Grove Drive, you're required to pay quarterly maintenance fees. You've missed 2 payment cycles, which puts you at $800 in arrears, plus late fees, bringing your total to $1,050. My street, Maple Grove Drive, was a quiet dead-end road in rural Montana, just outside Billings. There were only 5 houses on the entire street, all sitting on multi-acre lots. We'd lived here peacefully for 8 years, minding our own business, keeping our properties maintained. The idea that someone had formed an HOA without my knowledge felt like a fever dream. "Hold on," I said, setting my coffee mug on my truck's hood. "Nobody told me about any HOA. I never agreed to join one. You can't just create an HOA and start charging people fees." Patricia flipped through papers on her clipboard with practiced efficiency. According to Montana state law, if 75% of property owners in a defined geographical area vote to establish an HOA, all properties within that area fall under its jurisdiction. We held a vote, sent notices to all residents, and the measure passed 4-1. 4-1? There are only 5 houses on this street. You're telling me everyone but me voted for this? "That's correct, Mr. Lawson. The Hendersons, Mitchells, Chens, and Robertsons all voted in favor. We sent you 3 certified letters about the vote, all of which were returned as unclaimed." I remembered those letters. They'd arrived while I was in Colorado helping my brother recover from surgery. I'd been gone for nearly 2 months, and my neighbor had been collecting my mail but hadn't mentioned anything about certified letters. They'd probably gone back to the post office, and I'd never followed up. "Even if that's true, you're charging me for road maintenance?" I gestured toward the smooth asphalt stretching down Maple Grove Drive. "Lady, I poured that road myself 3 years ago. That's my concrete, my labor, my money. You weren't even living here then." Patricia's expression shifted to something resembling pity mixed with condescension. "I understand you may have performed work on the road previously, but now that we're an official HOA, all common areas fall under our jurisdiction. The road is considered common property, and maintenance fees are mandatory." "The road isn't common property. It's a private road on my land. I own the first lot where the road begins. When the county wouldn't pave this far out, I took it upon myself to create a proper road instead of the dirt path we had. I did it as a courtesy to my neighbors, but the road itself starts on my property." This was absolutely true. When my wife Sarah and I had moved here, Maple Grove Drive had been nothing but a rutted dirt track that turned into a mud pit every spring. The county maintained the main highway, but refused to pave our little dead-end street, claiming budget constraints. After 3 years of destroying our truck suspension and tracking mud into our house, I'd saved up $15,000, rented equipment, and spent an entire summer grading and paving the road myself. I'd done it right, too. Proper base, good drainage, smooth asphalt. My neighbors had been thrilled, but I'd never asked them to chip in. It was my gift to the community. Patricia made a note on her clipboard. "I'll need to see your property survey and documentation, proving the road is on your land. Even so, if the road services multiple properties, it may still fall under HOA jurisdiction. Regardless, your fees are still due. We'll be implementing late charges of $50 per week until the balance is paid." "You've got to be kidding me." "I don't kid about HOA regulations, Mr. Lawson. Additionally, I noticed your front fence needs repainting and you have what appears to be a commercial vehicle parked in your driveway. Both are violations of our new community standards." The commercial vehicle was my 1985 Ford F250, which I used for my contracting business. It had magnetic signs on the doors that I could remove, but I rarely bothered since I lived at the end of a dead-end street where nobody cared. The fence was weathered cedar that I planned to stain that summer, but it was perfectly functional and looked rustic, which was the whole point. Patricia, I'm not paying fees for a road I built, and I'm not painting my fence or moving my truck because some HOA I never agreed to join decided to make up rules. You want to take me to court? Go ahead. I've got documentation for every penny I spent on that road. She smiled, but it wasn't friendly. That's certainly your right, Mr. Lawson. However, I should inform you that unpaid HOA fees can result in liens against your property. We have a legal team on retainer, and we will pursue all available remedies. Have a good day. She walked away, her heels clicking on the asphalt I'd poured with my own 2 hands, leaving me standing there with cold coffee and a rapidly developing headache. Sarah came outside as Patricia's silver Lexus disappeared down the street. What was that about? Apparently we live in an HOA now, and they want money for maintaining the road I built. My wife, who normally had the patience of a saint, let loose a string of profanity that would have made a sailor blush. They can't do that. She says they can. Claims they held a vote while I was in Colorado and everyone but us voted for it. The Mitchells voted for this. And David Chen. He complained for years about HOAs when he lived in California. That's what bothered me most. Jerry Mitchell was a retired carpenter who'd helped me source some of the materials for the road project. David Chen was a software engineer who'd moved here specifically to escape HOA restrictions. The Robertsons were a young couple with 2 kids who mostly kept to themselves, but had always been friendly. And the Hendersons were new, having bought the old Kramer place about 8 months ago. I need to talk to the neighbors, I said. I started with Jerry Mitchell, who lived in the second house. Jerry was 67, weathered from a lifetime of construction work and not the type to mince words. When I knocked on his door that afternoon, he answered with a beer in hand and guilt written all over his face. Jason, listen. I can explain, he started before I'd even said anything. So it's true? You voted for an HOA? He sighed and gestured me inside. His wife Martha was at work, so it was just us in his workshop garage, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and wood stain. Patricia Henderson came to each of us individually. She said the HOA was going to be established whether we wanted it or not, because she had already filed the paperwork. Said if we voted against it, she'd make sure we got hit with every fine and regulation in the book, but if we voted for it, we'd have input into the rules. That's coercion, Jerry. I know. He set down his beer and rubbed his face. I'm ashamed, honestly. But Jason, you didn't meet this woman when she's in full intimidation mode. She had printouts of Montana HOA law, examples of other communities, everything. She made it sound like resistance was futile, so we might as well cooperate. Did she mention anything about charging me for road maintenance, for the road I built? Jerry's expression darkened. No. She said the fees would be minimal, just for common area landscaping and maybe some lighting, nothing about the road. If I'd known she was going to pull this crap, I never would have signed anything. What about the others? Talk to David. I think he's got the same regrets I do. The Robertsons seemed more on board, but I suspect Patricia offered them something. As for the Hendersons, well, Patricia's married to Dennis Henderson. They're the ones pushing all this. That explained a lot. I drove down to David Chen's house, the 3rd lot. David answered looking exhausted, which wasn't unusual for a guy who worked Silicon Valley hours from a Montana home office. I know why you're here, he said, waving me in. And before you say anything, yes, I'm an idiot. Patricia Henderson is a nightmare, and I fell for her manipulation tactics. Jerry said she threatened you guys. Not explicitly, but the implication was clear. She kept talking about how HOAs have broad enforcement powers, how they can fine you into bankruptcy, place liens, even force property sales. I dealt with that in San Jose, and it was hell. I moved here to get away from it. When she said the HOA was happening regardless, I figured I'd rather have a seat at the table than be the target. Has there actually been a board meeting? Have you had any input into these rules? David laughed bitterly. There was one meeting, held at the Hendersons' house. Patricia runs it like a dictatorship. Dennis is the treasurer, and they've filled the other board positions with people from outside our street. Apparently, the HOA boundaries include some properties on the adjacent roads too, though I haven't seen any of those people at meetings. Every proposal Patricia makes gets rubber stamped. I tried to object to the road maintenance fees, especially the ones targeting you, and she shut me down immediately. On what grounds? She said the road serves all properties equally, so all properties should contribute equally. When I pointed out that you'd paid for the entire thing yourself, she claimed that was an informal arrangement that predated the HOA and therefore wasn't legally binding. I felt my blood pressure rising. The road starts on my property, David. I have surveys. I believe you, man, and for what it's worth, I'm not paying these fees either. I told Patricia she could take me to court. She said she would. Over the next few days, I learned the full scope of Patricia Henderson's scheme. The Robertsons, Nick and Amanda, had indeed been offered a deal. Patricia had promised to waive their first year of fees if they voted for the HOA, claiming they needed community support to get established. By the time they realized the fees would be ongoing and substantial, they'd already committed their vote. The HOA boundaries had been drawn to include not just our 5 houses, but also 8 properties on the parallel street, Willow Creek Lane, and 3 properties on the intersecting Oak Ridge Court. Most of those owners were absentee landlords or elderly residents who'd signed off on the HOA formation without fully understanding what it meant. Patricia had carefully targeted properties where she could secure easy votes. The real kicker came when I pulled the HOA's filed documents from the county recorder's office. The stated purpose of the HOA included maintenance and improvement of all roads and common areas within the community boundaries. The projected budget showed $50,000 annually, collected through quarterly fees from 16 properties. That meant each property owner would be paying over $3,000 per year. For what? Our street had no common areas beyond the road itself, no parks, no clubhouse, no pool. Willow Creek Lane and Oak Ridge Court were already maintained by the county. The only thing that needed any maintenance was Maple Grove Drive, and I'd been maintaining it myself just fine. I spent the next week gathering documentation. I found my original surveys, which clearly showed Maple Grove Drive beginning at the edge of my property. I collected receipts for every material purchase I'd made during the road construction, photographs from the process, testimony from Jerry about helping with the project. I even pulled up the email correspondence I'd had with the county 3 years ago, where they'd explicitly stated they wouldn't maintain our road and gave me permission to improve it myself, as long as I followed proper drainage regulations. Armed with this evidence, I scheduled a meeting with Patricia Henderson. She agreed to meet at a local coffee shop in Billings, probably figuring a public place would keep me from making a scene. I was wrong about that. Mrs. Henderson, I have documentation proving that Maple Grove Drive is on my property and was constructed entirely at my expense, I said, sliding a folder across the table. She didn't even open it. Mr. Lawson, the road may have originated on your property, but it extends beyond your property boundaries and serves multiple parcels. Under Montana law, that makes it a common area subject to HOA jurisdiction. Show me the law. I beg your pardon? Show me the specific Montana statute that says an HOA can seize control of private infrastructure and charge the person who built it for maintenance. Patricia's professional smile faltered slightly. The HOA's attorney has reviewed all relevant statutes and confirmed our authority. Then you won't mind if my attorney reviews them too. You're welcome to waste your money on legal fees, Mr. Lawson, but I assure you we're on solid legal ground. The road serves the community, therefore the community maintains it. Let me ask you something, I said, leaning forward. Where's all this money actually going? You're collecting $50,000 a year from 16 properties to maintain one small residential road. I maintain that road myself for less than $1,000 a year in materials. So where's the other $49,000 going? Administrative costs, legal retainer, insurance, reserves for future projects, and contracted maintenance services. Contracted maintenance services? Who are you contracting? Henderson Property Services. I sat back stunned. Your husband's company? Dennis owns a property management business. It's only logical that we'd contract with a local trusted provider. This whole thing is a scam. You created an HOA to funnel money to your husband's business. Patricia stood up, gathering her purse. Be very careful about making accusations, Mr. Lawson. Slander can have legal consequences. You have 2 weeks to pay your outstanding balance, or we'll be filing a lien against your property. She walked out, leaving me sitting there with cold rage burning in my chest. That evening, I called a community meeting at my house. Jerry and Martha Mitchell came. David Chen came. The Robertsons came. I'd also invited several residents from Willow Creek Lane and Oak Ridge Court who I'd tracked down through public records. 12 people crowded into my living room, and every single one of them was furious about the HOA fees. "I'm paying for what?" demanded Margaret Sullivan, an 82-year-old widow from Oak Ridge Court. "I was told this was for community beautification. $20 a quarter, that's what the paper said when I signed it." We showed her the actual fee schedule, $800 per quarter, $3,200 annually. "This can't be legal," said Tom Richards, who owned 2 rental properties on Willow Creek Lane. "This is going to bankrupt my tenants." "It's predatory," David added. "Patricia targeted properties she could manipulate and drew boundaries to ensure she'd get the votes she needed." "So what do we do?" asked Martha Mitchell. "Can we dissolve the HOA?" I'd already researched this. In Montana, you need 75% of property owners to vote to dissolve an HOA. But there's another option. If we can prove the HOA was formed through fraud or coercion, we can petition the court to invalidate it. "Can you prove fraud?" Tom asked. "I can prove Patricia deliberately misrepresented the fees to multiple people." "Margaret, you're willing to testify that you were told $20 when the actual fee is $800. "Damn right I will." "And Jerry, David, you'll testify about the coercion?" They both nodded. "What about the road issue?" Nick Robertson asked. "Even if the HOA is valid, can they really charge you for something you built?" "That's a separate legal question, but it strengthens our case. If we can show the HOA's primary purpose is to extract money for infrastructure that's already provided, it demonstrates the fraudulent intent." Over the next month, I hired an attorney named Susan Vickers who specialized in property law. Susan was a sharp woman in her 50s who dealt with HOA disputes before. She reviewed all my documentation and interviewed everyone who'd attended the meeting. "You've got a strong case," she told me. "The coercion alone might be enough, but the fee misrepresentation is even better. Patricia told Mrs. Sullivan one thing and documented another. That's textbook fraud." "How long will this take?" "HOA disputes can drag on for years, but we can request an expedited hearing based on the immediate financial harm. I'll file a motion to suspend all fee collection pending resolution of the case." "Will that stop them from putting a lien on my property?" "It should. But Jason, you need to be prepared. The Hendersons have deep pockets if Dennis's business is doing well. They'll fight this hard." She was right. 2 weeks later, I received a notice that the Riverside Meadows HOA had filed a lien against my property for $1,250 in unpaid fees and late charges. Susan immediately filed our lawsuit challenging the HOA's formation and requesting removal of the lien. The case was assigned to District Judge Raymond Walsh, a no-nonsense jurist who'd been on the bench in Yellowstone County for 20 years. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, Patricia ramped up her harassment campaign. I received violation notices for my truck, my fence, my grass being a quarter-inch too tall, my mailbox being the wrong color, and my house numbers not meeting community standards. Each violation came with a $50 fine. I ignored them all. David Chen received similar notices. So did Jerry Mitchell. Patricia was targeting everyone who'd shown resistance, but she made a critical mistake. She sent violation notices to Margaret Sullivan for having weeds in her flower bed. Margaret, who was legally blind and couldn't maintain her garden anymore, had been relying on a volunteer from her church to help with yard work. When the volunteer missed a week, Patricia pounced. The violation notice informed Margaret that she had 72 hours to correct the issue or face daily fines of $100. Margaret called me in tears. "Jason, I can't afford this. I'm on a fixed income. I can barely make my property taxes." "Don't worry, Margaret. I'll take care of your garden, and this will all be over soon." I spent that Saturday pulling weeds from Margaret's flower beds and trimming her hedges. While I was there, Patricia Henderson drove by twice, slowing down to take photographs on her phone. The third time she drove past, I walked to the curb. "Can I help you with something?" She rolled down her window. "Just documenting violations, Mr. Lawson. You're performing commercial landscaping services in an HOA community without proper licensing." "I'm helping my elderly neighbor with her garden. That's called being a decent human being." That's called running a business without permits. I'll be filing a report with the county." She drove off, and I stood there wondering how someone becomes so thoroughly awful. The preliminary hearing finally arrived. Susan had prepared a comprehensive brief outlining the fraud, coercion, and irregularities in the HOA's formation. We had sworn affidavits from 7 property owners, including Margaret Sullivan's statement about fee misrepresentation. The Hendersons were represented by Marcus Brennan, an expensive lawyer from a large billings firm. He showed up in a suit that probably cost more than my truck and immediately began arguing procedural points to delay the hearing. Judge Walsh wasn't having it. "Mr. Brennan, I've reviewed the filings. This is a preliminary hearing to determine if there's sufficient cause to suspend HOA fee collection pending trial. Make your case or sit down." Brennan argued that the HOA was properly formed under Montana law, that all notices were properly sent, and the fee collection was necessary to maintain community infrastructure. Susan countered with our evidence of fraud and misrepresentation. She presented Margaret Sullivan's affidavit alongside the HOA's own documentation, showing the massive discrepancy in stated fees. "Your Honor," Susan said, "Mrs. Sullivan is an 82-year-old widow on a fixed income. She was told she'd be paying $20 per quarter. The HOA is attempting to collect $800 per quarter. That's 40 times what she agreed to. This is fraud, plain and simple." Brennan tried to argue that Margaret had misunderstood or misremembered the conversation. "Are you suggesting Mrs. Sullivan fabricated her statement?" Judge Walsh asked coolly. "No, Your Honor, but memory can be unreliable, especially in elderly witnesses. Be very careful where you're going with this, counselor." Brennan backpedaled quickly. I simply mean that without documentation of what was said verbally, we only have Mrs. Sullivan's recollection versus Mrs. Henderson's." Susan pulled out another document. "Actually, Your Honor, we have this email from Patricia Henderson to Margaret Sullivan, sent 2 days before the HOA vote. I'll read the relevant portion. The quarterly fee will be minimal, approximately $20 to $30, just enough to cover basic community needs." The courtroom went silent. Brennan's face turned red. Patricia Henderson, sitting in the gallery, looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "Your Honor," Susan continued, "this email directly contradicts the HOA's filed fee schedule of $800 per quarter. This demonstrates a clear pattern of fraudulent misrepresentation." Judge Walsh studied the document. "Mr. Brennan, does your client have an explanation for this discrepancy?" Brennan requested a brief recess to confer with his client. When they returned, he offered a weak explanation about initial fee projections being revised upward based on infrastructure assessments. "So Mrs. Henderson sent this email knowing the fees would be much higher?" Judge Walsh asked. "The fees were finalized after the vote, Your Honor." "The vote that couldn't have happened without Mrs. Sullivan's participation based on false information?" Brennan had no good answer for that. Judge Walsh made his ruling from the bench. "I'm granting the plaintiff's motion. All HOA fee collection is suspended pending trial. Furthermore, the lien placed on Mr. Lawson's property is hereby removed. This HOA appears to have been formed through misrepresentation at minimum, possibly fraud. We'll determine that at trial. Court is adjourned." I wanted to cheer, but managed to restrain myself until we got outside. Susan was pleased but cautious. "This is a good start, but we haven't won yet. They can still fight this at trial." "How long until trial?" 4 to 6 months, probably. In the meantime, you don't have to pay fees and they can't place new liens. But they can continue to exist as an HOA and potentially impose non-financial penalties." "Like what?" "They could attempt to restrict your property use through injunctions, though that would require another court order. Honestly, after today's hearing, I doubt Judge Walsh would grant them much. But they might try." She was right. Patricia Henderson might have lost this battle, but she wasn't done fighting. 2 weeks after the hearing, I received a certified letter informing me that the HOA board had voted to revoke my access to Maple Grove Drive. I read the letter 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. The HOA was claiming that because the road served multiple properties, it was common property, and because I'd refused to pay maintenance fees, my access rights were being revoked. They were demanding I use an alternate route to access my property. There was no alternate route. My property was at the end of Maple Grove Drive. The only other way to reach it would be to drive across 2 miles of undeveloped land, which was both physically impossible and illegal. I called Susan immediately. "They're trying to landlock me." "They're what?" I read her the letter. She was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was tight with controlled anger. "This is beyond stupid. This is actionable. They can't revoke your access to a landlocked property. That violates Montana easement law. Jason, I think they just handed us our case." "What do you mean?" "If they're claiming the road is common property under HOA control, but you can prove the road originates on your property and you built it, then they're attempting to seize your private property through HOA authority. That's not just fraud, that's potentially criminal conversion." "Criminal?" "It might not rise to criminal charges, but it's a civil rights violation at minimum. We can amend our lawsuit to include this, and I guarantee Judge Walsh is going to be very interested." Susan filed an emergency motion that afternoon. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, and this time, Judge Walsh looked actively angry when he read the HOA's letter. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," he said to Marcus Brennan. "Your client is attempting to deny Mr. Lawson access to his own property because he won't pay fees for a road he built himself?" "Your Honor, the HOA's position is that the road is community property, and access is contingent on paying maintenance fees. And how exactly is Mr. Lawson supposed to reach his property without this road? That's not the HOA's concern. Property owners are responsible for ensuring their own access." "Mr. Brennan, you can't be serious. You're describing intentional landlocking, which is illegal in Montana. Have you reviewed Montana Code Annotated 7017-111? "Your Honor, the HOA believes—" "I don't care what the HOA believes. I care about the law. Ms. Vickers, do you have documentation proving the road originates on your client's property?" Susan presented my survey documents, photographs, receipts, and the email correspondence with the county. She also had Jerry Mitchell present to testify about helping with the construction. Judge Walsh reviewed everything carefully. "Mr. Lawson, you personally paid for and constructed this road?" "Yes, Your Honor. Every penny came from my savings. I did it because the county wouldn't maintain our street, and I was tired of dealing with mud and ruts. I never asked my neighbors to contribute." "And the HOA is now claiming ownership of this road and attempting to charge you for its maintenance?" "Yes, Your Honor." The judge turned to Patricia Henderson, who was sitting beside her lawyer. "Mrs. Henderson, do you understand that what you're attempting to do is legally impossible? You cannot seize control of private infrastructure built on private property and then deny the property owner access to their own land." Patricia stood up. "Your Honor, the HOA has consulted with property law experts who confirmed our authority." "Then your experts are wrong. Mr. Brennan, I'm issuing an immediate injunction against the HOA, preventing any interference with Mr. Lawson's use of Maple Grove Drive. Furthermore, I'm expediting the trial to address the underlying issues here. This HOA's actions are becoming increasingly concerning." "Your Honor," Brennan said, "we request the opportunity to withdraw the access revocation letter." "Denied. The letter has been issued and it demonstrates intent. We're going to trial in 30 days. I want both parties to bring every piece of documentation related to this HOA's formation, the road construction, and all communications between the parties. This needs to be resolved definitively." Over the next month, Susan worked practically around the clock preparing for trial. We deposed Patricia Henderson, Dennis Henderson, and the other HOA board members. We gathered more witness statements. We pulled financial records showing that Henderson Property Services had been paid $35,000 in the 6 months since the HOA's formation, despite performing virtually no actual work. The trial began on a Tuesday morning in early October. The courtroom was packed with residents from all 3 streets affected by the HOA. Margaret Sullivan was there, along with the Mitchells, the Chens, the Robertsons, and a dozen other property owners who'd been targeted by Patricia's enforcement regime. Susan's opening statement laid out our case clearly. "Your Honor, this trial is about a fraudulent scheme perpetrated by Patricia and Dennis Henderson to extract money from their neighbors through abuse of HOA authority. The evidence will show that Mrs. Henderson deliberately misrepresented the fees to secure votes for the HOA's formation, that the HOA's true purpose was to funnel money to Mr. Henderson's business, and that when challenged, the Hendersons attempted to use HOA authority to seize control of private property and deny the rightful owner access to his land. Marcus Brennan's opening was more defensive. He argued that any misunderstandings about fees were honest mistakes, that the HOA was properly formed under Montana law, and that the Hendersons were simply trying to maintain community standards. The trial lasted 3 days. Susan called witness after witness who testified about Patricia's misrepresentations. Margaret Sullivan, speaking clearly despite her age, described exactly how Patricia had assured her the fees would be minimal. Tom Richards testified about being told the HOA would be basically free for landlords whose tenants would cover the costs. David Chen provided devastating testimony about the single board meeting he'd attended. Patricia ran it like a dictatorship. She presented her husband's company as the only option for maintenance services, didn't entertain any discussion about the fees, and shot down every question or objection. When I suggested we should survey residents about their priorities, she said the board's authority wasn't subject to popular approval. But the most powerful testimony came from a witness we'd discovered during depositions. Linda Morrison was a property owner on Oak Ridge Court who'd initially supported the HOA but had grown disillusioned. She revealed that Patricia had approached her about serving on the board with a very specific pitch. She told me the HOA was designed to generate revenue, Linda testified. She said if we managed it correctly, we could create a reliable income stream. She talked about expanding the HOA's boundaries to include more properties, increasing the fees gradually, and contracting all services to Henderson Property Services. She described it as a sustainable community management model, but it was pretty clear she meant a money-making scheme. Brennan tried to discredit Linda, suggesting she was disgruntled about not being selected for the board. But Linda had kept notes from her conversation with Patricia, including dates, times, and direct quotes. The notes corroborated everything she'd testified. When it was the defense's turn, Patricia took the stand. She was poised and professional, denying any intent to defraud anyone. She claimed the fee discrepancies were due to revised infrastructure assessments and that she'd tried to inform property owners about the changes. Susan's cross-examination was surgical. Mrs. Henderson, you sent an email to Margaret Sullivan stating fees would be $20 to $30 quarterly. Do you deny sending that email? No, and the actual fees are $800 quarterly, correct? That's what the board approved, yes? Did you send a follow-up email to Mrs. Sullivan informing her the fees had increased by nearly 40 times? We sent updated information to all property owners. When? After the vote. So Mrs. Sullivan voted based on false information? It wasn't false, it was preliminary. Mrs. Henderson, is it your testimony that you genuinely believed when you sent that email that quarterly fees would be $20 to $30? Patricia hesitated. The initial projections were in that range. Susan pulled out another document. This is the HOA's proposed budget, filed with the county 2 weeks before you sent that email to Mrs. Sullivan. It projects quarterly fees of $800. Were you aware of this budget when you told Mrs. Sullivan the fees would be $20 to $30? Patricia's composure cracked. I may have simplified the information for clarity. You lied to secure her vote. Objection, argumentative, Brennan said. Sustained, Judge Walsh said. Ms. Vickers, rephrase. Mrs. Henderson, you knowingly provided false information to Mrs. Sullivan to secure her vote for the HOA formation, correct? I provided preliminary estimates that changed. Estimates you knew were wrong when you provided them? Patricia didn't answer. Susan moved on to the road issue. You're aware that Mr. Lawson personally constructed Maple Grove Drive? I'm aware he claims that. Are you disputing that he constructed the road? I'm disputing that it gives him special rights. The road serves multiple properties, making it common infrastructure. The road originates on Mr. Lawson's property, correct? It passes through his property, yes. And he paid for all materials and labor? According to his receipts, yes. So he built a road on his property at his own expense, and your position is that the HOA can seize control of it and charge him for maintaining it? We're not seizing anything. We're managing community infrastructure. Did you attempt to revoke Mr. Lawson's access to this road? We sent a letter informing him that continued access required payment of maintenance fees. Knowing that his property is landlocked without access to this road, property owners are responsible for securing their own access, by building their own roads perhaps, which is exactly what Mr. Lawson did? Patricia's frustration was visible now. The road serves 5 properties. It's only fair that all 5 properties contribute to maintenance. Fair? Mr. Lawson spent $15,000 of his own money building this road. How much have you personally contributed to road maintenance, Mrs. Henderson? The HOA has contracted with Henderson Property Services, your husband's company, which has been paid $35,000 in 6 months. What has that company actually done to maintain Maple Grove Drive? Routine inspections, sweeping, minor repairs. Mr. Lawson, could you stand, please? Susan asked. I stood. Mr. Lawson, have you seen anyone from Henderson Property Services performing work on Maple Grove Drive? No, never. Have you noticed any maintenance being performed on the road other than the work you've done yourself? No. I fixed a pothole in July and swept the road in August. Nobody else has done anything. Susan turned back to Patricia. So Henderson Property Services has been paid $35,000 for work that hasn't been performed? They've performed the work as contracted. Show me documentation of this work, invoices, work orders, photographs, anything. Brennan objected that the request was overly broad and ambiguous, but Judge Walsh overruled him. I want to see documentation too, Mr. Brennan. If Henderson Property Services has been paid $35,000, there should be ample documentation of services rendered. Brennan promised to produce the documentation during the defense's case, but when that time came, the documents were sparse and suspicious. There were invoices for road inspection and preventative maintenance, but no photographs, no detailed work descriptions, no materials receipts. It looked exactly like what it was, fake billing designed to extract money from the HOA, which was itself extracting money from property owners under false pretenses. The final nail in the coffin came when Susan called a forensic accountant who'd reviewed the HOA's finances. He testified that of the $50,000 collected in the first 6 months, $35,000 had gone to Henderson Property Services, $8,000 to the law firm, $4,000 to administrative expenses that consisted mainly of payments to Patricia herself, and only $3,000 to the reserve account. None had been spent on actual community improvements. This financial structure, the accountant testified, is consistent with a shell organization designed to funnel money to related parties rather than a legitimate homeowners association. Judge Walsh didn't even need to deliberate long. After closing arguments, he announced his decision from the bench. I've heard enough. This HOA was formed through fraudulent misrepresentation of material facts. Mrs. Henderson knowingly provided false information about fees to secure votes for the HOA's formation. The court finds that the Riverside Meadows HOA is invalid and is hereby dissolved. All fees collected to date must be returned to property owners within 30 days. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the Yellowstone County Attorney's Office for review of possible criminal charges related to fraud and embezzlement. The courtroom erupted in applause. Patricia Henderson looked like she'd been punched. Dennis Henderson, who'd been sitting quietly throughout the trial, put his head in his hands. Judge Walsh wasn't finished. Regarding the road on Maple Grove Drive, the court finds that Mr. Lawson constructed this road on his own property at his own expense. The road remains his private property. However, given that the road serves other properties, the court is establishing an easement allowing the other 4 property owners on Maple Grove Drive access to the road. Mr. Lawson may not revoke this access, but neither may he be charged for maintenance of infrastructure he built. If the other property owners wish to contribute to maintenance, that's a matter for private negotiation. He looked directly at Patricia. Mrs. Henderson, you attempted to use HOA authority to seize control of your neighbor's property and extract money from vulnerable residents through deception. Your behavior has been reprehensible. In addition to the fee refunds, I'm awarding Mr. Lawson damages of $25,000 to compensate for his legal expenses and the value of his time defending against your fraudulent scheme. I'm also awarding damages to Mrs. Sullivan in the amount of $5,000 for the emotional distress caused by your harassment. These judgments will be joint and several against you and your husband." Patricia finally found her voice. "Your Honor, we don't have that kind of money." "Then you shouldn't have engaged in fraud, Mrs. Henderson. You have 30 days to begin making payments, or Mr. Lawson and Mrs. Sullivan can pursue collection through normal means, including liens on your property. Now get out of my courtroom." The aftermath was swift and satisfying. The Yellowstone County attorney did investigate and ultimately filed charges against both Patricia and Dennis Henderson for theft by deception and filing fraudulent business documents. They'd apparently been running similar schemes in other communities, forming HOAs, funneling money to Dennis's company for non-existent services, and then moving on before anyone could organize resistance. The criminal trial took place 4 months later. I testified again, as did several other victims from different neighborhoods. The evidence was overwhelming. The Hendersons were convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 3 years in prison with hefty fines and restitution orders. The house they'd bought on Maple Grove Drive went into foreclosure. A nice retired couple from Minnesota bought it for a bargain price and proved to be excellent neighbors who had zero interest in forming HOAs. The other property owners on Maple Grove Drive did approach me about contributing to road maintenance, and I appreciated that they asked rather than demanded. We worked out a voluntary arrangement where they'd chip in for materials if I continued doing the labor. It was fair, reasonable, and based on mutual respect rather than coercion. Margaret Sullivan used her $5,000 in damages to hire a regular gardener and made me promise to come over for dinner once a month. I agreed, and her pot roast became a highlight of my calendar. David Chen apologized repeatedly for voting for the HOA, though I told him he'd been manipulated and it wasn't his fault. He and I became better friends through the whole ordeal, bonded by shared combat against bureaucratic tyranny. Jerry Mitchell built me a beautiful custom bookshelf as a thank you gift, refusing to accept any payment. "You saved all our asses," he said. "This is the least I can do." The story even made local news, with reporters covering the trial and conviction. I gave one interview to the Billings Gazette, making sure to emphasize that people need to carefully review any HOA documents before signing them and shouldn't be afraid to push back against unreasonable demands. One unexpected benefit was that contractors started calling me for advice about similar situations. Apparently, the Henderson scheme wasn't unique. There were other people in Montana and surrounding states facing HOA overreach, and they wanted to know how I'd fought back successfully. I ended up consulting on 3 other cases, all of which were resolved in favor of the property owners. The experience changed my perspective on community involvement. I used to think keeping to myself and maintaining my own property was sufficient. Now I understood that sometimes you have to stand up not just for yourself, but for neighbors who might not have the resources or knowledge to fight back. Margaret Sullivan couldn't have battled the Hendersons alone. Tom Richards might have lost his rental properties. People would have been hurt if someone hadn't been willing to push back. Sarah and I talked about it one evening, sitting on our back porch, watching the sunset over the Montana landscape we loved. "You think we're done with HOA drama?" she asked. "I hope so, but if anyone ever tries to form another one around here, I'll be the first one organizing opposition." "My hero," she said, only half joking. The truth was, I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just wanted to live peacefully on my property, drive my truck, maintain my fence however I liked, and not be harassed by petty tyrants with clipboards. The fact that standing up for those basic rights had helped other people was a bonus. About a year after the whole thing ended, I was doing routine maintenance on Maple Grove Drive, filling a small crack that had developed over the winter. A car I didn't recognize pulled up, and a man in his 30s got out. "Are you Jason Lawson?" he asked. I stood up, suddenly wary. "Depends who's asking." He laughed. "Don't worry, I'm not from an HOA. My name is Brian Caldwell. I read about your case in the paper, and I'm dealing with something similar in Great Falls. I was hoping you might have some advice." We talked for an hour. His situation involved an HOA trying to take over a private park that his grandfather had built for the neighborhood. The parallels were striking. I connected him with Susan Vickers and shared all the documentation and strategies that had worked for me. 6 months later, Brian called to tell me he'd won his case. The HOA in Great Falls had been dissolved, and his family's park remained private property. He was grateful, almost emotional. "You probably saved us $100,000 in legal fees by showing us what worked for you," he said. "I can't thank you enough." "Just pay it forward," I told him. "If you see someone else being bullied by an HOA, help them out." That became my standard response. Over the next few years, I helped coordinate resistance to HOA overreach in 7 different communities across Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. We created a network of property owners, lawyers, and activists who shared information and resources. We helped dissolve 3 fraudulent HOAs, reformed 2 legitimate ones that had been captured by bad actors, and prevented 4 new HOAs from forming through deceptive practices. It wasn't about being anti-HOA in principle. Some communities genuinely benefit from homeowners associations, especially in developments with shared amenities like pools or parks. But the system is vulnerable to abuse by people like Patricia Henderson, who see it as an opportunity to extract money and exert power over their neighbors. The key lessons I learned were straightforward. Read everything carefully before signing. Get legal advice if something seems wrong. Document everything. Don't be afraid to push back against unreasonable demands, and find allies because there's strength in numbers. My life eventually returned to normal, or as normal as it gets when you're semi-famous for fighting HOAs. I continued my contracting business, maintained Maple Grove Drive with voluntary contributions from my neighbors, and enjoyed the quiet rural life that Sarah and I had moved here to find. Every time I drove down that road, though, I remembered what it had taken to protect it. The smooth asphalt represented more than just a pathway to my house. It represented the principle that you can't let bullies, whether they wear suits and carry clipboards or anything else, take away what you've built through your own labor and investment. The road I'd poured myself remained mine, and no HOA would ever take it from me. That victory, more than anything else, made all the stress and legal battles worthwhile. I'd stood up for what was right, helped my neighbors, and proven that sometimes the little guy can win against people who abuse systems designed for community benefit. And in the end, that was all I'd ever wanted. To live on my property in peace, drive on the road I'd built, and be left alone by people who thought they had authority they'd never earned. The fact that I'd managed to dismantle a criminal operation and help dozens of other people in the process was just a fortunate side effect of refusing to be pushed around. Patricia Henderson was released from prison after serving 18 months of her 3-year sentence. I heard through the grapevine that she and Dennis moved to Arizona, where they kept a much lower profile. I hoped they'd learned their lesson, but I doubted it. People like that rarely change fundamentally. They just get better at hiding their schemes or move on to new targets. As for me, I finally got around to staining my fence. I chose a nice weathered gray that matched the rustic aesthetic I'd always wanted. My 1985 Ford F250 remained parked in my driveway, magnetic signs and all. My grass grew to whatever height I felt like cutting it, and nobody said a word because there was no HOA to say otherwise. Sometimes the simplest victories are the sweetest. I'd fought for the right to live my life on my own terms, on property I owned, maintaining standards I chose. That fight had taken me through courtrooms and confrontations, through stress and expense, through months of uncertainty and anger. But in the end, I'd won. The road was mine, my property was mine, and my freedom from petty tyranny was secure. And really, what more could anyone ask for than that?